G'day there, mate. You've wandered far enough for tonight. Kick off your boots, get comfortable, and let your mind drift across the rust-red soil of the Australian Outback, a land as ancient as time itself, where every ridge and dune has a story, and every shadow might just be watching you back. In this sleep story, we'll journey deep into the haunted heart of the Red Centre. You'll hear of ghostly nurses, phantom riders, sacred rocks, and spirits that stretch back to the dream time. These tales are not invented. They're woven from the land, from real places, and from the voices of those who've dared to listen. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the wind carry you across ghost towns, secret bases, and lonely tracks that disappear into dust. Before you drift off, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll never miss another journey into the world's forgotten corners. Now breathe deeply and let the Outback speak.
The whispering sands of Pine Gap. The desert holds its breath at Pine Gap. Just outside of Alice Springs, where the red dust bleeds into the sky and the sun seems to hover in judgment above the earth, lies a place shrouded in secrets, and perhaps something far older and stranger than government conspiracies. Pine Gap, officially a joint Australian and American intelligence facility, is known for its silence, but the locals will tell you that the sands here whisper. And not all those whispers are man-made. The Arrernte people, custodians of this land for tens of thousands of years, have long spoken of the area's spiritual gravity. Before satellite dishes and armed fences, this was sacred ground, known for powerful song lines that crossed the McDonnell Ranges like threads in a dream. These weren't just paths or stories, they were memory tracks, living lines of energy where the spirits of ancestors walked and watched. And Pine Gap was where several of them converged. When the facility was constructed in the late 1960s, strange things began to stir. Workers spoke of voices that came from beneath the ground, soft murmurs in languages none of them recognized. Machinery would falter. Shadows moved independently of light. Some said they saw glowing figures dancing along the ridge at twilight, too graceful to be human, too silent to be alive. One man, a technician brought in from Perth in the early 1970s, reportedly resigned after 2 weeks. He never gave a reason. But later, in a quiet pub in Darwin, he told a barman that the desert had spoken to him directly, and that it hadn't been kind. He said the spirits were interrupted by the presence of the facility, and they were angry. He described seeing what he called a sand figure, a humanoid shape formed from swirling grit, standing outside his trailer at dawn, watching, not moving, just there. Another story comes from a local woman, part of a cleanup crew contracted to maintain the facility's perimeter. Her name was Meryl, and she'd grown up nearby, steeped in both European and indigenous heritage. One night in winter, a cold snap that made the desert feel sharp as glass. She was doing rounds near the wire fence when she saw something white floating above the ground, just beyond the range of the security lights. Not mist, not dust, but a shape. It drifted sideways, parallel to the fence, and as it passed by, the lights behind it flickered, not off, not on, but dimmed, as if something old and heavy was pressing against the world itself.
She said she felt the air change. The oxygen felt wrong, thick. Her torch wouldn't turn back on until she was nearly back at the ute. Later, a technician told her there were no anomalies on the system. Everything had been normal. But when she returned home, her dog, usually boisterous, refused to come near her for days. It growled low, as if smelling something it couldn't see. There's no official record of these things, of course. Pine Gap doesn't issue reports on ghosts or aboriginal spirits. But in Alice Springs, you'll hear stories in bars, on porches, whispered over the campfire. Everyone knows someone who saw something. Lights in the sky that don't blink like aircraft. Sudden winds that come without warning. A strange hum, low, pulsing, that you feel more than hear, especially just before sunrise. And then there's the sandwalker. That's what some locals call it. A figure glimpsed from the corners of eyes, seen mostly near twilight or dawn, when the outback softens and shadows stretch longer than they should. Always walking, always facing away. But if you call out to it, if you try to get its attention, it stops. Not turns, just stops, as if listening, and then vanishes. Some say it's the embodiment of a displaced spirit, an ancestor who cannot walk the songline anymore because the land beneath it has changed. Others say it's a warning, a reminder that not everything can be fenced off, labeled, or controlled. Even the military isn't immune. In the early 2000s, a fire broke out in a storage unit near the edge of the facility. No equipment malfunction, no weather trigger. When the investigators reviewed the footage, a stretch of tape had been inexplicably corrupted, burnt white with static. The timestamp stopped at precisely 3:33 a.m. That number has come up more than once around Pine Gap. People wake at that time, dogs bark at that time. Something about it repeats. Some believe Pine Gap is more than just a spy base, that it sits atop an ancient convergence point, not just of intelligence operations, but of spirit energy. That the electromagnetic fields manipulated below the surface have awakened something old, not evil, not good, just ancient, unknowable, and watching. The Arunta say the land remembers, that it responds when disrespected, and they believe some places like Pine Gap were never meant to be built upon, that even now, when the world sleeps and the stars burn hard above the desert, the earth below Pine Gap still thrums with old power, and something beneath it still walks, searching for the stories it once followed. So next time you see a glowing light on the horizon, or hear a whisper on the wind that sounds like it's speaking just to you, maybe don't follow it. Maybe let it pass, because in the heart of the Outback, the ghosts don't always want company.
The ghostly matron of Alice Springs Hospital. The corridors of the old Alice Springs Hospital no longer echo with the cries of the sick or the hurried steps of nurses. The wards have been closed for years, replaced by a more modern facility further east. But if you ever walk past the crumbling remains of the original hospital on Stewart Terrace, you might feel it. A lingering presence, quiet but watchful. They say the building still breathes, still remembers. And somewhere inside, the ghostly matron walks her rounds. This story begins in the early 20th century, long before Alice Springs had even earned its name. Back then, it was Stewart Town, and the Central Australian frontier was harsh. Blazing summers, bone-cold nights, and isolation that gnawed at the nerves. The first proper hospital was little more than a cottage, built in the 1920s, with timber frames and stone walls baked hard by the sun. There were few doctors, fewer supplies, and even less mercy from the climate. And yet, through the chaos, one woman held it together, Matron Elizabeth Muir. Born in South Australia in the year 1888, Elizabeth trained as a nurse during the Spanish flu pandemic. Hardened by grief and driven by a fierce sense of duty, she volunteered to serve in the remote interior, believing no person should die alone, even in the red heart of the continent. She arrived in Stewart Town in the early 1930s, taking over a struggling hospital with broken equipment and exhausted staff. Within a year, she had restored order. Clean beds, proper charts, discipline in the ranks. Patients said she had a stern face but kind eyes. And when pain took them beyond words, she was there. Silent, steady, the last face many ever saw. She died in the winter of 1949. A stroke, they said. Quiet, in her sleep, in a small room beside the main ward. The nurses found her bed neatly made, her shoes polished at the foot, but on her bedside table sat her nurse's cap, folded just so, and her keys, all 17 of them, arranged in a perfect circle. No one knew why. Not long after her passing, strange things began to happen. A bell above the nurse's station, one that had been disconnected for months, started ringing at odd hours. Always 3 short rings, always around 2 in the morning. Patients complained of cold spots, of invisible hands adjusting their sheets, of a soft humming in the dark, a woman's voice singing old lullabies. One young nurse, posted in the surgical ward in 1952, claimed she saw Matron Muir one night. Not a ghostly shimmer or a blur, but a solid figure, walking briskly down the hall with keys jangling at her hip. The nurse followed, thinking it was a prank, perhaps a senior nurse testing her nerve. But when the figure turned the corner, it vanished. No one believed her, until another nurse, weeks later, described the exact same thing, down to the keys. The tales spread. Over the decades, reports came in from patients, night staff, even visitors. The sightings followed a pattern. Always at night, always between midnight and 4, always near the old administration wing. People heard doors opening and closing on their own. They smelled antiseptic in rooms long abandoned. They felt a presence, not hostile, but firm, watching. In the 1980s, when the hospital was decommissioned, urban explorers and thrill seekers began to sneak in. They found old records, rusted gurneys, cabinets full of dust-covered vials. And some found more. One local lad, barely 18, claimed he entered on a dare and saw a woman in a nurse's uniform standing in a darkened corridor. She pointed toward the exit. Nothing more. Just raised an arm and pointed like a silent command. He ran. Later, he returned with mates. But the corridor she'd stood in no longer existed. It had been sealed off years ago. What makes the ghostly matron different from so many other hauntings is her presence seems tied not to tragedy, but to duty. She doesn't scream or moan or lash out. She simply patrols, maintains order, a spectral ward matron, making sure things run the way they should. But not all experiences are gentle. In 1996, a tourist from Melbourne, unaware of the stories, wandered into the abandoned hospital one afternoon. She was a history buff, drawn by curiosity. She later told police she felt pushed on the stairwell. Not tripped, not slipped, but pushed. She broke her wrist but refused to blame anyone. When shown an old black and white photo of the hospital staff from the 1940s, she froze. Her hands trembled. Then she pointed. "Her," she whispered. "That's the woman who stared at me just before I fell."
There's no rational explanation, of course. No proof. The building's now locked up, the windows boarded, the stories relegated to local lore. But some security staff, hired to patrol the grounds, still refuse to do night shifts. One said the radios pick up static when near the matron's old office. Another claimed to hear keys jingling in the hallway behind him, though no one was there. Locals believe Matron Muir never left because she never truly finished her work. The desert, after all, doesn't lend itself to easy closure. People still die in Alice Springs. Some still cry out in the night. And maybe, just maybe, she still hears them.
So if you ever find yourself near Stewart Terrace after dark and you hear the faint sound of keys or the smell of antiseptic drifts on the breeze, don't be alarmed. She's just doing her rounds. And if you're lucky, she'll pass you by without a glance. If you're unlucky, well, you'll know. Chambers Pillar, a sentinel with a shadow. Out in the endless stillness south of Alice Springs stands a sandstone monolith that seems carved not by nature, but by memory. Chambers Pillar, a solitary sentinel rising over the desert plains, is a place that commands reverence. At sunrise, its golden flank catches the light like a burning torch. By twilight, it casts a shadow long enough to swallow time. And at night, the old ones say, that shadow walks. The geological birth of Chambers Pillar dates back over 300 million years. Wind and erosion sculpted it from the remnants of an ancient sandstone range. It stands over 50 meters tall, marked with the carved names of early explorers like John McDowell Stewart, who etched his name into the rock in 1860. But for the Arrernte people, who knew this place long before any European laid eyes on it, the pillar is not just stone. It is a living story. They call it Itirkawara. In the dreamtime, it was once a boy, a young man who broke sacred laws by taking a woman forbidden to him. Shunned by his people, he fled into the desert, alone and ashamed. As punishment from the ancestral spirits, he was turned to stone, forced to stand forever apart, watching the lands he could no longer walk. His story is a warning, etched into the land itself, and it is said his spirit remains trapped within the pillar, brooding beneath its layers. Visitors over the years have reported an uncanny sensation near the site, a pressure in the air, a sudden drop in temperature, the sense that you're being watched, not with malice, but with weight. One traveler, a school teacher from Victoria, camped at the base of the pillar during a solo journey in the early 2000s. She later wrote in her journal that she heard footsteps around her tent during the night, heavy, deliberate, circling. When she emerged in the morning, there were no tracks in the dust. But her compass no longer worked. Photographers speak of strange distortions in their images, light flares where none should exist, or shadows in frames that defy the angle of the sun. One man, an amateur historian, captured a long exposure shot of the monolith under a full moon. When he developed the image, he found a figure in the foreground, a tall silhouette, featureless, facing the pillar. He swore he had been alone.
But the most persistent tale is that of the moving shadow. During certain times of year, usually in late autumn, the shadow of Chambers Pillar is said to stretch not just across the land, but toward people. Campers, hikers, even passing vehicles on the distant dirt track have all claimed to see it grow unnaturally fast, curling toward them like a searching hand. Some say it stops just short. Others say it brushes them, a cold sensation, like smoke passing through skin. The Arrernte believe it is the spirit of Itirkawara, seeking forgiveness, or perhaps company. In 1987, a group of university students conducted a research trip to document rock art in the area. They pitched camp at the base of the formation and spent the evening sketching and recording audio notes. One recorder, left running overnight, captured hours of silence. But at 3:18 a.m., a whisper broke the static, a low, rhythmic chant in a language no one could identify. Linguists later suggested it resembled ancient Arrernte dialects, but no full translation could be made. All that is certain is that the chant repeated the same phrase, over and over, 6 times. Then, silence. The group awoke the next morning to find their fire pits scattered and their recording gear partially buried under red dust. None of them had heard a thing during the night. They left early and never returned. Locals have long respected the area. Arrernte elders still conduct ceremonies there, though they rarely speak of what they see or feel. One elder, speaking on the condition of anonymity, once said, "The boy who broke the law, his sorrow was so great, it sank into the ground. That sorrow doesn't die, it moves, it listens." And what of the tourists? Most see only beauty, the grandeur of sandstone, the perfect symmetry against the desert sky. But some leave, changed. A backpacker from Germany, traveling alone in 2011, wrote on a travel forum that she had a dream while camping nearby. In it, she stood atop the pillar, unable to move, screaming without sound. Below her, figures danced in a ring of fire, faces hidden by smoke. She woke gasping for air, her tent zipped, untouched, but covered in fine red sand despite no wind that night. To this day, Chambers Pillar remains a destination for photographers, spiritual seekers, and adventurers. But the old ones say not to camp too close, to show respect, to greet the stone with a whisper, not a shout. Because sometimes, if you stand too near at sunset, the shadow turns toward you, and in that moment, the stone remembers you, and it may not let go. So if you ever find yourself standing beneath the towering presence of Chambers' pillar, as the sun slips behind the ranges, and you feel something pass through you, cold, patient, sorrowful, you may have brushed against Itirkawara, and he may still be watching.
The haunting of Old Telegraph Station. Nestled a few kilometers north of Alice Springs, shaded by ghost gums and framed by ochre hills, stands a piece of Australia's colonial heart, the Old Telegraph Station. Built in the year 1871 as part of the Overland Telegraph Line, this modest complex of stone buildings was once the lifeline connecting Australia to the rest of the world. Messages tapped in Morse code pulsed across the desert here, shrinking vast distances into mere seconds. But time passed, the wires fell silent, and something else settled in. Ask a local about the station's history and they'll tell you two stories. One is of triumph, the taming of the Outback, the marvel of technology, the men who brought communication to the Red Center. The other story is darker. It is about silence, shadows, and sorrow. About the children who lived and died within those walls, and the ones who never left. You see, from the early 1900s until the mid-20th century, the station served as part of the bungalow, an institution for Aboriginal children forcibly removed from their families. These were the stolen generations, kids taken in the name of assimilation, raised apart from their language, their land, and their people. Some survived, some didn't, and their spirits, many believe, still linger. Visitors to the site often comment on the stillness. Not peace, but a charged quiet, as if the air holds its breath. In the old dormitories, people report sudden chills. Cameras malfunction. Children's laughter has been heard at dusk, echoing from empty rooms. One tour guide, a seasoned elder who'd worked at the site for over a decade, refuses to go into the girls' wing after sunset. She once entered alone to lock up, only to hear the sound of running feet behind her. Turning quickly, she saw no one. But one of the old iron beds, untouched for years, was shaking ever so slightly. In 1993, a television crew filmed a historical segment on site. They interviewed local historians and filmed B-roll across the grounds. Later, while reviewing the footage, the sound technician noticed a faint whisper beneath the presenter's voice. Isolated and enhanced, the voice appeared to repeat a phrase in Pitjantjatjara. When translated, it read, "Why are you still here?" The crew dismissed it as interference. But the next day, their camera stopped functioning altogether. Not damaged, just blank. No error, no footage, just a black screen, as if the station had swallowed it whole. But the most persistent figure reported at the telegraph station is the boy near the well. There's an old water well at the edge of the property, sealed now, for safety. But in the early days, it was the main source of water for the children and staff. A tragic accident occurred in the 1920s when a young boy fell in. His body was recovered days later, but locals say his spirit never climbed out. Several independent accounts describe a small figure, barefoot, in ragged clothing, standing near the edge of the well, usually in the early morning hours. He's never seen moving, just standing, watching. Tourists think it's a prank at first, but when they approach, the figure is gone, vanished. Sometimes they hear a splash, even though the well has been dry for decades.
One caretaker, a practical man who didn't believe in ghosts, had a change of heart after a summer storm in the early 2000s. He was inspecting damage to the roof when he glanced toward the well. There, in the rain, stood the boy, motionless, soaked, and staring directly at him. Not with anger, not with sorrow, but with something deeper. The caretaker never returned to the property, not even to collect his final paycheck. And still the reports come. A child's handprint on a dusty window. soft crying in the laundry room, doors closing gently, as if guided by small hands. Some believe the spirits are not trapped, but tethered by memory, by the intensity of what they experienced. Displacement, fear, confusion. Others think they remain because no one ever truly said goodbye. Today, the telegraph station is a heritage site. Families visit, children run through the grass, the buildings have been restored, the grounds kept neat. But beneath the surface, something ancient stirs. Not malevolent, just present. Elders continue to speak of the need for respect, to acknowledge the pain as well as the progress, to speak gently when inside, to listen, not just look. Because in this place, history is not just a word on a plaque. It breathes, it lingers, it watches. So if you visit and the air grows heavy, if you hear a whisper not carried by the wind, or feel the touch of a hand too small to be your own, do not run, do not shout, just pause. Because someone might be trying to tell you they were here once, and they remember.
Simpson Desert's vanishing stockman. The Simpson Desert stretches out like an ocean of rust and silence, endless dunes rolling toward every horizon, their crests soft as ash, their colors shifting with the sky. It is a place of extremes, where the heat can melt thought and the night cold can bite through canvas. Yet, even here, in the most desolate reach of Central Australia, something, or someone, walks beside you. The locals call him the Vanishing Stockman, and whether you believe in ghosts or not, one day you may owe him your life. The story goes back to the early 1930s, when a young stockman named William Barlow was working cattle drives near Andado Station on the edge of the Simpson. He was tall, broad-shouldered, known for his easy laugh and knack with horses. He had a reputation for going where others wouldn't. Uncharted trails, dry riverbeds, country that seemed to shift underfoot. His mates said he had desert eyes, always scanning, always knowing where he was. Until one day, he simply disappeared. It was during a routine muster, somewhere between the dry salt pans and the blood-red dunes. The group had camped under the stars, shared Billy tea, yarned until sleep took them. In the morning, William was gone. No note, no struggle, no footprints. Just an untouched swag and a still warm campfire. They searched for days. Nothing. Some reckoned he got lost. Others muttered about old spirits, places men shouldn't tread. But no one really knew. The desert never gave him back. Years passed. His name faded into campfire stories. But then, something strange began to happen. Travelers, lost, dehydrated, broken down, began to speak of a man on horseback who appeared out of the shimmer, always in the worst heat, always when hope had just about run dry. One such tale comes from 1967, when two surveyors mapping salt crust patterns near Mount Dare lost radio contact and veered badly off course. Their vehicle overheated, water ran out, and the younger of the two, delirious with sunstroke, reported seeing a man in an old-style drover's hat riding a chestnut horse. The man pointed, not spoke, just pointed, toward a small rise in the land. When they followed, they discovered a disused borehole with just enough water to hold out until rescue. The rescuers, when they arrived, found only the surveyors. No horses, no tracks. Then, in the early 1980s, a retired truckie named Ron Hogan broke down with a flat tire some 40 kilometers into the desert's edge. He had no satellite gear, no water left, and night was falling fast. Just as he began to drift off inside his cab, a knock came on the window. Startled, he looked up to see a man with a broad-brimmed hat and dust-covered coat. The stranger said nothing, only gestured for Ron to follow him on foot. They walked for what felt like hours across dunes and spinifex until they reached a small hill. There, the man stopped, tipped his hat, and vanished behind the ridge. On the other side, a road, and a tourist van coming over the horizon. When Ron told the story later, he described the man's eyes as oddly familiar. When shown an old photo of William Barlow from a museum pamphlet, his hands shook. "That's him," he said. "Swear on my life."
Not all stories are comforting, though. Some say the stockman only helps those he chooses, that others, the greedy, the disrespectful, get only silence, or worse. A couple in 2004, traveling by four-wheel drive across the French line, claimed to have seen a figure in the distance, standing still, watching. They waved. It didn't move. Then, hours later, their vehicle electronics failed inexplicably. GPS, sat phone, even their torch. They camped uneasily and heard boots crunching on gravel around them in the night. But no one came. In the morning, their gear worked again. The figure was gone. They left the desert early and never returned. Indigenous lore in the region doesn't speak directly of a stockman, but stories abound of guardian spirits, wanjinas or mimis, who patrol sacred paths, sometimes taking the shape of humans. Some elders suggest that William Barlow may have stumbled into such a path, not taken by death, but absorbed into the dreaming, transformed into a kind of watcher, neither alive nor dead, just there, a part of the land. What sets these stories apart is their consistency. Different decades, different people, all describing the same man. Old-style drover's kit, leather boots, and a chestnut horse that leaves no tracks. He never speaks, only points. A former ranger with Parks Australia, who wishes to remain unnamed, told of a heatwave event where he became disoriented near the edge of the dune field. As he began to panic, unsure of which ridge led back to camp, a rider appeared in the far distance. Against all reason, the ranger followed his direction, a slight nod, a hand gesture, and made it back safely. That night, his compass needle spun wildly, and his tent flap opened and closed twice, though no wind stirred. Today, travelers still pass through the Simpson Desert on tag-along tours, four-wheel drive adventures, or desert crossings. They're told to bring water, supplies, backup communications. But occasionally, even now, someone comes back with a different kind of story, of a man in the heat haze, a rider who appears just when all seems lost. So if you ever find yourself stranded, the desert closing in, and you see a man with a weathered face and the dust of centuries in his coat, don't ask questions. Don't try to follow him beyond the point he leads you to. Just nod your thanks, because not everyone in the desert finds their way back.
The screams beneath Lassiter's cave. In the scorched western reaches of the Northern Territory, where the ranges rise like broken bones from the red sand, there lies a shallow cave, easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Just a depression in the rock wall, shaded by ghost gums, hollowed by wind and time. Yet this place, Lassiter's Cave, holds a silence so heavy it feels like it's listening. And if you camp nearby at night, that silence might break with screams. The cave takes its name from Harold Bell Lassiter, a man who claimed in the early 20th century to have found a fabulous reef of gold deep in the desert, Australia's own El Dorado. He said he discovered it as a young man in the 1890s, but was unable to relocate it. Decades later, in 1930, he launched an expedition to find it again. The trip quickly turned disastrous. Arguments, broken down equipment, isolation, the desert swallowed them whole. The expedition scattered, and Lassiter was left alone, wandering in the blistering sun, searching for his reef.
He eventually stumbled upon this cave, weak, starving, sunburnt beyond recognition. It was here, sheltered beneath the sandstone overhang near the Hull River, that he etched his final thoughts into a diary. He survived for several days, kept alive by indigenous locals who offered him what food and shelter they could. But in the end, he died, desperate, disoriented, still dreaming of gold. That should have been the end of it. but the desert never forgets.
Over the years, campers and hikers in the area have reported strange disturbances near Lassiter's Cave. Some hear footsteps on gravel, others whispering voices, indistinct, urgent, as though someone is searching, calling out. But the most unsettling stories are of the screams, high, guttural, and full of despair. They come just after dusk, often from beneath the cave itself, though there is no known crevice or tunnel leading deeper underground. A park ranger, stationed nearby in the late 1980s, dismissed these stories as heat-induced hallucinations. That is, until he experienced them himself. He was setting up a temporary shelter for a visiting geology team when he heard what he thought was a wild dog in distress. But as he approached the cave, the sound changed. It wasn't a howl. It was a voice. A man's voice, ragged and rasping, crying for help. Over and over. When the ranger stepped into the cave's shadow, the sound stopped instantly. The air turned thick. His flashlight flickered and died. He never returned to that post.
Another account, this one from a hiker in the early 2000s, tells of a night spent camping within sight of the cave. She described a vivid dream of being buried alive, the rock closing in above her, her mouth full of dust. She awoke gasping for breath, only to find that her sleeping bag had been dragged several meters from where she'd laid down. No wind that night, no animals nearby, just drag marks in the sand leading from the edge of the cave. Some believe the spirit of Lassiter still lingers there, trapped by unfinished purpose. His obsession with gold, his defiance of warnings, and the agony of dying so close to help, it all left an imprint, an echo of madness and hunger that the land absorbed. Indigenous stories in the region speak of a place of sorrow, not evil, but mournful, a spot where spirit energy sinks into the earth and moans through the stone. One elder, speaking softly around a campfire, said that Lassiter was not alone in that cave when he died, that something watched him, something older than the desert itself, and that when a man dies with that much greed in his heart, the land doesn't always let him go. More recent travelers, armed with smartphones and satellite GPS, have captured strange audio near the site. Unexplained EMF spikes, voice recordings full of static and strange fragments, words like reef or mine or water whispered beneath the wind. Paranormal investigators once tried to conduct a night vigil there, but left before midnight, visibly shaken. One of them later told a journalist that he felt as if something wanted to crawl inside his chest. Even geologists, grounded in fact and stone, admit there is something off about the area. Compass needles twitch. GPS readings fluctuate without cause, and some claim the rock around the cave retains heat in unusual ways, warm patches where the sun has long since set. What remains undisputed is this: Lassiter died believing in a reef of gold that might never have existed, believing the desert would eventually give up its secret. Instead, it took him, and perhaps in a way, it made him part of its secret. So if you ever find yourself near Lassiter's Cave as the sun sinks behind the ridgeline and the shadows begin to climb the rock walls, listen carefully. That sound you hear might be the wind, or it might be something else, something clawing at the memory of gold, of water, of life. A man's final scream caught forever in the stone.
Oodnadatta Track and the Phantom Train. The Oodnadatta Track cuts through some of the most remote and unforgiving country in South Australia, a winding, dust-choked road of stone and silence that follows the old route of the Overland Telegraph Line and the former Central Australia Railway. For more than a century, this track bore the weight of camel trains, steam locomotives, and the dreams of Outback settlers. But these days, the rails are gone, and the trains no longer run. At least not ones made of steel and coal. Ask the old-timers along the track, and they'll tell you. On certain nights, usually in the dead heat of summer, you can still hear it. A train that's not there. A distant whistle, mournful and long, drifting over the gibber plains. The low thunder of wheels on tracks. The chug-chug of a steam engine laboring against the dust. But no smoke, no lights, no train. Just the ghost of one. It all began with the Ghan, the original steam-powered Ghan, that is. Named after the Afghan cameleers who once helped open up the inland, the line was notorious for delays, breakdowns, and extreme conditions. In the 1920s and 30s, the Ghan ran from Port Augusta to Alice Springs, stopping at tiny sidings like William Creek, Coward Springs, and Udnadada itself. Traveling on it was a rough affair. Stifling heat, sandstorms, and the ever-present risk of washouts or mechanical failure. One of the worst tragedies on the line occurred in 1934. A small mixed goods train, hauling livestock and several passenger carriages, became stranded in the no-man's land between Aljabuckina and Peak. A flash flood from summer storms had destroyed the tracks behind them, and heat warped the rails ahead. For 3 days, passengers and crew waited in the sweltering heat, running out of food and water. By the time help arrived, 2 men had died of dehydration, and a woman had taken her own life in a delirious state. The event never made national headlines, just another mishap in the unforgiving Outback. But some say that's when the hauntings began. Travelers report the phantom train near various points along the track, but most sightings, or hearings, occur near the ruins of Aljabuckina Bridge. This iron structure, once the longest in South Australia, still stands in solemn silence above the Niels River. Locals say if you camp near the bridge on a moonless night, you might hear footsteps on the iron walkway above, heavy boots pacing back and forth, though no one is there. One pair of gray nomads, camping just off the bridge in 2010, claimed they were woken just after midnight by the unmistakable sound of a train rushing past, so loud their camper trailer shook. Yet when they stumbled outside, they found only stillness, not even wind, just the faint smell of coal smoke in the air.
Another account comes from a road crew in the early 1990s, repairing sections of the nearby dirt track. They were working late, using portable lights and radio comms, when one worker began shouting that a train was coming. He'd seen a headlight on the horizon, bright and fast. The crew scrambled to move equipment, confused and panicked, but nothing came. No train, no sound, just a fading light that vanished into the dunes. It's not just rail workers and travelers. Locals too have their stories. An Aboriginal elder from the Arabana people once told visiting anthropologists about a spirit train that travels the old track. Not a machine, he said, but a message. A warning, perhaps. He described the engine as glowing, translucent, with no crew aboard, just a single woman in white, staring from one of the carriages, her face pressed to the glass. She is said to be the woman who died in the heat back in 1934, still looking for the husband who left the train to find help and never returned. Even now, the ghost train seems to follow the same timetable. Most sightings occur between 1 and 3 a.m., usually in January or February, during the wet season when the heat is at its most oppressive. It never slows, never stops. It doesn't leave tracks or raise dust, only echoes. Some say it's nothing more than sound trapped in the land, like the ringing of a long-gone bell. Others believe it's a memory replayed over and over, tied to the trauma of that tragic summer. There are even those who say if you stand on the track and try to flag it down, the train will pass through you, cold as ice, leaving you changed somehow. Not harmed, but never quite whole again. There's no proof, of course, no photos, no recordings that survive without unexplained interference, but plenty of travelers leave that part of the Outback with a story they hadn't planned on. One young couple, honeymooning across Australia in a rooftop camper, said they heard the whistle and dismissed it as imagination. until they played back their phone's voice memo the next morning. The background hum of insects, a breeze, and beneath it, faint but clear, the long call of a steam whistle, followed by the echo of wheels. These days, the Udnadata track draws explorers, caravanners, and four-wheel drivers eager to experience the raw spine of the country. Most see only dust and stars, but if you're out there, far from signal and city light, and the night feels just a little too quiet, listen. If the earth begins to tremble softly beneath your boots and a wind rolls over the plain from nowhere, you might be standing in the path of something that refuses to die. And if you hear that whistle, long, low, and mournful, best to step aside, because some trains are never late. They're just waiting for you to believe.
The spirits of Kings Canyon. Deep in the heart of Watarka National Park, where sheer sandstone cliffs rise like ancient fortresses from the desert floor, Kings Canyon stands in silent majesty. It is a place where time folds in on itself, where the red walls seem to glow from within, and the wind moves not randomly, but purposefully. To walk through Kings Canyon is to walk on sacred ground, and sometimes the ground watches back. For the Laricha people, the traditional owners of this land, the canyon is not just a natural wonder. It is a living, breathing entity, one woven with stories that go back tens of thousands of years. The rocks here speak in their own way. The domes of the Lost City, the waterhole of the Garden of Eden, the steep steps that climb to the rim walk. Every feature has meaning, connection, and spirit. And those spirits, some say, are still very much alive. The Dreamtime stories of the area speak of ancestral beings, giant serpents and sky spirits who shape the cliffs and waterholes. The very formation of the canyon is said to be the work of these beings, who left their presence imprinted into the land. To disturb the balance here, to move rocks, to call out disrespectfully, to walk off track, is to risk waking something that does not forget. One of the oldest stories is that of Wati Kujara, the two men who passed through the region and left warnings behind. The story goes that they battled a malevolent spirit here, one that hid in the shadows of the canyon walls. Though they subdued it, they could not destroy it. Instead, they bound it to the land, forcing it into silence, a silence that has held mostly ever since. Mostly. Tour guides and visitors have long whispered of strange encounters in the canyon. Footsteps echoing when no one is near. Sudden gusts of wind that move against the natural flow of the gorge. A presence, heavy, watching, especially near the narrow ledges where the canyon drops away sharply. Some speak of figures glimpsed among the beehive domes, silhouettes that move with impossible grace before melting into the rock. One guide, a veteran of more than 100 rim walks, tells of an early morning hike with a small group. As they reached the top, pausing to take in the view, a child pointed to a ledge and asked, "Who's that man down there?" The guide looked and saw nothing, but the child insisted, a tall man, wearing white, standing very still. When they moved on, the child refused to walk further, saying the man was now walking behind them. That night, back at the lodge, the child drew a picture, a long-limbed figure with dark eyes, standing alone beneath the domes.
Another account comes from a French backpacker who chose to hike the canyon alone, despite warnings to stay with groups, especially near dusk. He later claimed that as the sun dipped below the cliffs, he began to feel disoriented. The track, once clear, now seemed unfamiliar. He walked in circles, unable to find his way back. That's when he saw the woman. She stood across the ravine, barefoot, her long hair fluttering in the wind. She raised a hand, not in greeting, but warning. When he blinked, she was gone. Minutes later, he stumbled across the trail again, finding his way out just as darkness fell. He believes she was a spirit, guiding him back. But others say she is the Watcher, one of the canyon's protectors, who only appears when the land itself calls her. Even more unsettling are the dreams. Several visitors, particularly those who camp within reach of the canyon walls, report vivid, shared dreams. In them, they see themselves walking through the canyon. But it is not as it is now. The rocks glow, the sky is darker, and there are shapes moving along the edges. They hear music, flutes, drums, deep chanting, and a sense of being observed by something vast and old. When they wake, they are exhausted, as if the dream was real. Some even find dust on their feet, though they never left their tents.
Park rangers have their own tales. One recalls finding a pair of hiking boots sitting neatly on the canyon rim, facing out. No tracks, no note, no missing persons report, just boots. Another tells of a group of hikers who returned pale and shaken, saying they heard voices echoing from the Garden of Eden waterhole, voices speaking in an ancient tongue, chanting slowly, as if calling something up from the depths.
Despite these stories, there is no sense of malevolence here. The spirits of Kings Canyon are not evil. They are guardians, teachers, reminders of a time when the world was shaped by story, and every stone held a name, but they demand respect. Those who come with curiosity and reverence leave with wonder. Those who mock, disturb, or intrude where they should not, do not always find their way back. An elder once said, "The spirits in the canyon, they don't care about tourists or money or fame. They care about memory. And if you forget the story, they might just remind you." So if you visit Kings Canyon, walk softly, breathe deeply, watch the rocks, and listen to the wind. And if you feel something brush past you when there is no one there, or catch movement at the edge of your vision, do not be afraid. You are being seen and remembered.
Wycliffe Well, UFOs and the Shadow Men. Roughly halfway between Alice Springs and Tennant Creek, just off the Stewart Highway, lies a place that doesn't quite belong. Wycliffe Well. On the surface, it's little more than a roadhouse stop. Fuel, snacks, a few quirky statues, and a caravan park surrounded by the shimmering heat of the Barclay tableland. But this humble dot on the map bears a title few would expect: Australia's UFO capital. And beyond the lights in the sky, some claim there's something darker. Figures in the desert, watchers without faces, the Shadow Men. Wycliffe Well has been a hotspot for sightings since at least the Second World War, when servicemen stationed nearby reported strange aerial lights performing impossible maneuvers, stopping midair, changing direction instantly, and vanishing without a trace. At first, it was written off as heat mirages or wartime nerves, but the reports kept coming. In the 1980s and 90s, passing travelers began keeping logs. Dozens described glowing orbs hovering above the scrubland. Others saw metallic discs flying silently overhead, some in broad daylight. Local station hands told of cattle becoming restless at certain times of night, their eyes following something invisible moving just above the treetops. The roadhouse, leaning into the phenomenon, decorated its exterior with murals of little green men, saucers, and alien signposts. It became a curiosity, a roadside novelty. But underneath the kitsch, those who stayed longer, those who really listened, began to speak of stranger things, not flying saucers, but walkers, figures that didn't come from above, but from below. They're called the Shadow Men. Sightings usually occur late at night, often between midnight and 4 in the morning, when the air grows still and the stars burn clear. Witnesses describe them as tall, thin, humanoid shapes, darker than darkness, with edges that shimmer like heat haze. They don't run, they glide, always at the edge of vision, always just out of reach. One traveler, a retired army officer driving from Darwin to Adelaide, stopped at Wycliffe Well for a night's rest. He'd seen combat. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but he told of waking in the early hours with a crushing sense of dread. Looking out his van window, he saw 3 figures standing by the fence line, not moving, not speaking, just watching. He turned on the headlights. Nothing. When he stepped out, the air felt electric. He left before dawn. Another tale comes from a backpacker who camped a few kilometers outside the town, wanting to stargaze without the interference of artificial lights. She set up a tent, laid back on a mat, and began taking photos of the night sky. It was only the next day, reviewing the images, that she saw them. Faint, shadowy figures on the horizon. In one image, closer. In the next, gone.
Locals say the sightings are more frequent during certain moon phases, particularly new moons, when the land is at its darkest. They also say dogs refuse to cross specific patches of scrub, whimpering and backing away. One elderly resident claimed he once followed a shadow man, said he felt called by it, walked into the bush for nearly an hour, following its shape, only to find himself standing at the edge of a dry clay pan he didn't recognize. No footprints behind him, no phone signal. Just the whisper of wind and the sensation that something had brought him there to be seen. There are theories, of course. Some say it's connected to the underground water channels beneath the desert, that they carry not just moisture, but energy. Others point to the presence of military testing ranges nearby, suggesting electromagnetic interference, secret experiments, or residual radiation. Then there are those who believe the shadow men aren't extraterrestrial at all, but interdimensional, beings slipping through the veil at thin points in the earth. Wycliffe Well, they argue, is one such thin place. But the most chilling stories don't come from fleeting sightings. They come from those who claim the shadow men entered their dreams. One such account comes from a woman who stayed overnight in the caravan park. She dreamt of standing in the desert, surrounded by black figures who pulsed with static, as if wrapped in electricity. They didn't speak, but she understood them somehow, felt them in her bones. When she woke, her arms were covered in thin scratches, not deep, not bleeding, just there, parallel, like fingers had gently traced her skin. Another man, a drifter passing through in 2007, claimed he woke with the overwhelming sense that someone had been inside his van, though the doors were locked from the inside and nothing was taken. Only a small pile of red desert sand had been placed neatly on his dashboard. He left that same hour and was never seen in Wycliffe again. The Wycliffe locals have a simple rule: don't go wandering after midnight. Don't whistle in the dark. And if you see a shape moving where no shape should be, don't follow. Don't look back. Despite the stories, the place continues to draw visitors. Some come chasing answers. Others just want a glimpse. But all leave with something. Sometimes it's a photo, sometimes a dream, sometimes just a feeling, like something unseen is still walking beside them. So if you find yourself at Wycliffe Well, beneath a sky heavy with stars, and the desert air grows unnaturally still, keep your voice low, watch the fence lines, and if you wake to find a figure at your window, staring with eyes you cannot see, close the curtain, slowly, and wait for dawn.
The Broken Bird of Tennant Creek. Tennant Creek sits like a mirage along the Stewart Highway, a town born of gold, hardened by dust, and humming quietly with history. Most who pass through remember the long stretch of bitumen, the heat radiating from the red earth, and the distant bark of desert dogs at dusk. But locals know there's more to this place than meets the eye. For tucked between tales of mining booms and cattle drives is the mournful legend of the Broken Bird, a spirit said to haunt the skies and windswept flats around Tennant Creek, singing to no one and watching from above. The story, like so many in the Outback, begins with tragedy. In the winter of 1942, during the height of the Second World War, Tennant Creek became an unlikely stopover for aircraft moving between southern Australia and the war fronts in the north. Makeshift runways were carved from spinifex and stone, and military planes landed often, their bellies full of mail, personnel, and fuel drums. One of these flights, a small reconnaissance craft, carried, unusually, a civilian. Her name was Evelyn Drake, a young schoolteacher from Adelaide who had volunteered to travel north as part of a morale program. She was to visit small, remote schools and deliver books, lessons, and music. She was known for her clear singing voice and always traveled with a small bird cage. Not with a real bird, but with paper birds cut and painted by her students. She said it reminded her that hope could fly, even in war. But Evelyn's plane never reached its destination. The aircraft went down just outside Tennant Creek, in a sudden downdraft near a rocky outcrop known locally as Conjura, a sacred site to the Warrumungu people. The pilot survived with injuries. Evelyn did not. Her body was recovered days later, her satchel still strapped to her side, the paper birds strewn around her like fallen leaves. The crash site was quickly cleared, the wreckage removed, and the incident mostly forgotten by history. But not by the land. In the years that followed, stories began to emerge. Children at the local school spoke of a woman in white standing near the fence line during recess, humming softly. At first, the teachers thought it was a prank, until one of them, arriving early one morning, heard the humming herself, a melody so sad and sweet that it brought tears to her eyes. When she turned the corner, the sound stopped. But hanging on the chain-link fence was a single paper bird, aged and yellow, flapping in the wind. Locals say the broken bird, as she came to be called, first appeared as a song. A gentle tune heard on still nights, drifting in from the hills. The melody never quite the same, but always unmistakably human. Some believe it's Evelyn's voice, still trying to deliver her final lesson. Others say the spirit took flight the moment she died. Truck drivers along the Barkley Highway report seeing a figure on the roadside just before dawn, a woman, barefoot, her dress fluttering like feathers. She never asks for help, never gestures, just watches. And then she's gone. Sometimes, they say, she appears in their rearview mirror, just for a moment, perched like a memory behind them. More chilling are the stories from the air.
Light aircraft pilots have long refused to fly directly over Conjura after dark, not for airspace reasons, but because of what they call interference. Instruments go wild, radios fuzz, headphones fill with static, sometimes pierced by the faint sound of singing. One pilot, flying a survey route in the early 2000s, described seeing what he thought was a flock of birds rise from the rock formation below. But when he looked closer, they weren't birds. They were pages, fluttering, white, spinning upward in a spiral. Pages that vanished before reaching the clouds. One Warrumungu elder shared that Conjura has always been a place of voices, a meeting point between this world and another. He believes Evelyn's spirit, innocent and full of purpose, was welcomed by the old spirits, allowed to remain as a watcher, a reminder. He said she sings not out of pain, but out of yearning, for the students she never reached, for the journey she never finished. Still, not every encounter is gentle. A local woman walking her dog near the old airstrip claimed she felt suddenly overcome with sadness, so sharp and immediate she fell to her knees. Her dog refused to move forward, growling at an empty stretch of wind. Then, clear as a bell, she heard a single line of song, a child's lullaby, sung in a woman's voice. The next day she returned to the spot and found a torn piece of music manuscript stuck to the chain wire fence. To this day, people leave paper birds at Conjura, quiet tributes, messages on wings. Some vanish, some remain, gently moving in the desert breeze. And the song? It's still heard now and then, usually near sundown or in the hours before dawn. It comes without warning, a voice in the emptiness, singing a melody no one taught you, but you somehow know. It clings to your memory, soft and feathered, long after it fades. So if you ever find yourself near Tennant Creek and the wind falls still and a tune drifts past that makes your chest ache with something like remembering, stop, listen. You may have heard the broken bird, still flying, still singing, still watching the children she never got to teach.
The Forgotten Spirits of Hermannsburg Mission. West of Alice Springs, nestled in the ochre arms of the Finca River, stands a collection of simple whitewashed buildings. Quiet, sun-bleached, and still. This is Hermannsburg, known in the Arrernte language as Ontaria. Today, it's a peaceful historic precinct, celebrated as the birthplace of renowned Aboriginal artist Albert Namatjira. But beneath its tranquil surface lies a deeper story. One of sorrow, one of silence, and of spirits who still walk beneath the ghost gums at dusk, not with anger, but with forgotten purpose. Established in 1877 by Lutheran missionaries from Germany, Hermannsburg was one of the earliest attempts to civilize and Christianize the Aboriginal peoples of Central Australia. It became home to generations of Western Arrernte people, some willingly, some not. Over time, the mission grew to include a church, a schoolhouse, homes, and a water pumping station. To outsiders, it was a beacon of order in the heart of the desert. But within the mission walls, other things lingered: pain, loss, and a profound cultural silence. Children were brought here, often separated from their families. Language was discouraged. Ceremony was hidden. The deep ties between land and spirit were severed by rules and routines. Many elders died here, away from country. Some say they still haven't returned. Visitors today speak of the strange hush that settles over the mission grounds in the late afternoon. Not just the quiet of isolation, but a pressure, like air holding breath. In the old dormitories, people have reported hearing soft murmurs, not in English or German, but in whispered Arrernte, rising and falling like prayer. Others describe the faint sound of footsteps in empty rooms, or the creak of beds that no longer stand. One former caretaker tells the story of a shadowy figure often seen in the corridor outside the women's quarters. Tall, cloaked, with a soft shuffle. When he tried to investigate the movement one evening, he felt an overwhelming sadness, so intense that it brought him to tears. Nothing appeared on the security cameras. Nothing was taken. Yet the next morning, he found the old Bible in the chapel open to the book of Exodus, a passage about exile and return. More unsettling are the accounts from visitors staying overnight in the artist accommodation near the old schoolhouse. One woman, a painter from Adelaide, reported waking in the middle of the night to see a group of children standing at the foot of her bed. She said they weren't threatening, just watching. One boy stepped forward and placed a hand on her blanket, and she heard a single word: home. When she turned on the light, the room was empty. Her canvas, left blank the night before, had a faint outline drawn in red chalk, a gum tree and a cross.
Even those passing through speak of being drawn to the church. Built in 1896 from hand-hewn stone, the building remains remarkably intact, but inside, visitors describe the air as heavy, not stale, but dense with feeling. More than one person has heard music playing when no service is on, simple hymnals, a distant harmonium, and once the sound of clapping sticks in time with the tune. The Warrumungu and Arrernte elders who still live near Ontario say the land remembers, that the ancestors walk slowly here, not out of fear, but out of caution. Some spirits, they believe, are caught between beliefs, not fully Christian, not fully returned to country, lost in limbo, searching.
One elder, a woman whose grandparents lived at the mission, described a recurring dream. In it, she walks through the old kitchen, following the smell of damper and tea. She hears a woman humming a lullaby, one she never learned, but somehow knows. The dream always ends the same way. She turns a corner, sees a face she recognizes but cannot name, and wakes with tears on her cheeks.
Archaeologists working on site in the late 1990s uncovered several unmarked graves beneath what is now the community orchard. The identities of those buried there remain unknown. The graves were covered respectfully and the area blessed. But since then, some staff report that garden tools go missing and later reappear perfectly cleaned, lined up in order. One even found a posy of wildflowers left on the workbench, arranged just so. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Hermannsburg holds a kind of stillness that is hard to explain, a sadness that isn't bitter, but watchful, and a sense that the past walks very close behind the present, especially when the shadows stretch long across the mission yard.
So if you visit, speak softly. Take time to listen. Sit beneath the ghost gums and let the wind pass through your thoughts. You may hear nothing, or you may hear voices carried on the dry breath of history. Voices that never got to say goodbye. Lake Amadeus, mirage of the dead. Lake Amadeus shimmers like a vision torn from another world, a vast, gleaming expanse of salt stretching over 180 kilometers in length west of Uluru. From the air, it appears otherworldly, silver-white in the harsh sunlight, studded with pale pinks, ochres, and streaks of red iron oxide. But on foot, it is desolate, silent, a cracked and brittle skin covering ancient sorrow. For Lake Amadeus is more than a salt lake. It is a mirror, and some say it reflects more than just sky. The Pitjantjatjara and Yankunytjatjara peoples, whose lands cradle the lake, have known it by a different name for thousands of years, Pantu. For them, it is sacred ground, a site heavy with Chukurpa, the dreaming law. It is said to be the resting place of spirits who once crossed the earth during creation time, only to become trapped beneath the salt when the world changed shape. According to lore, Pantu is a place of mirages, not just light tricks, but soul echoes. It shows you not where you are, but what was, and sometimes, what might have been. Travelers across the centuries have reported strange illusions on the lake bed, shapes that shimmer and disappear, figures walking the horizon, always ahead, always unreachable. The earliest European accounts tell of explorer Ernest Giles, who came upon the lake in 1872. He was forced to turn away, unable to cross the salt. His journals mention ghostly distortions on the surface, mirages of trees where there were none, rivers that turned to dust upon approach, and what he described as men made of glass standing still in the distance. Dismissed at the time as heat stroke or exhaustion, these visions would be echoed decades later. In the early 1950s, a surveyor mapping topography for potential roads claimed to see a group of figures walking in single file across the flats. Thinking them to be local Aboriginal hunters, he called out, but they did not respond. He followed for nearly an hour, yet could never close the distance. Then, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched, the figures simply vanished, not over a dune or behind a rise, but dissolved into the blinding white glare. That night, he dreamt of being lost in fog, surrounded by voices whispering in a tongue he couldn't understand. Dreams are common near Lake Amadeus. Rangers who camp on the outskirts report vivid, unsettling visions of drowned deserts, endless walks, or silent crowds standing on the salt. One described awakening to the sound of someone crying nearby, a man's voice, low and broken, though he was alone for over 20 kilometers in every direction. Then there are the mirages that leave evidence.
A family traveling through the area in a four-wheel drive in 2011 pulled over near the lake's edge to rest. The children wandered close to the salt crust despite warnings and came back babbling about a silver man who walked under the ground. Thinking it a child's imagination, the parents dismissed it until they noticed small, bare footprints in the salt. Human, but long. The stride was wrong, too elongated, too deep for a child. They took photos. That night, their car battery drained without reason. The engine refused to start until sunrise. Some believe the lake is cursed. Others say it's haunted by the spirits of explorers and camel drivers who perished trying to cross it, dehydrated and hallucinating beneath the merciless sun. One tale, often repeated in hushed tones, is of a man, unnamed in most versions, who was last seen heading into the lake bed with a map and a water bottle, chasing a shortcut. When searchers found his remains days later, he'd walked in circles, always just a few hundred meters from the edge. He died facing a mirage, a false shimmer of a tree line that never existed. But the oldest warnings come from the traditional owners. They say certain sections of the lake should never be crossed, that the spirits under the salt do not like to be disturbed, that the dead walk there not as ghosts, but as memories caught in loops, doomed to repeat their final steps. One elder, speaking with quiet conviction, told of the sleepers, shadowy figures who rise only at twilight and wander across the flats, dragging time behind them. He said they do not speak, but they can see. And if they see you, they remember your face. To this day, pilots flying over Lake Amadeus sometimes report anomalies on radar. Movement below where nothing moves. A dot, then nothing. A shape, then static. And some who look down from the sky, expecting only salt, claim they see people. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, standing motionless, all facing the same direction. Always gone upon a second glance. There are no settlements on Lake Amadeus, no walking tracks, only silence and wind, and the dry crunch of salt beneath your boots. But if you go there, and many do, bring respect. Walk softly. Say the old names aloud if you know them. And if you see someone on the far side of the lake, waving, calling, or just standing still, do not follow. Because some of the things that shimmer on Lake Amadeus are not meant for the living.
The Forgotten Spirits of Hermannsburg Mission. West of Alice Springs, nestled in the ochre arms of the Finca River, stands a collection of simple whitewashed buildings. Quiet, sun-bleached, and still. This is Hermannsburg, known in the Arrernte language as Antaria. Today, it's a peaceful historic precinct, celebrated as the birthplace of renowned Aboriginal artist Albert Namatjira. But beneath its tranquil surface lies a deeper story. One of sorrow, one of silence, and of spirits who still walk beneath the ghost gums at dusk, not with anger, but with forgotten purpose. Established in 1877 by Lutheran missionaries from Germany, Hermannsburg was one of the earliest attempts to civilize and Christianize the Aboriginal peoples of Central Australia. It became home to generations of Western Arrernte people, some willingly, some not. Over time, the mission grew to include a church, a schoolhouse, homes, and a water pumping station. To outsiders, it was a beacon of order in the heart of the desert. But within the mission walls, other things lingered: pain, loss, and a profound cultural silence. Children were brought here, often separated from their families. Language was discouraged. Ceremony was hidden. The deep ties between land and spirit were severed by rules and routines. Many elders died here, away from country. Some say they still haven't returned. Visitors today speak of the strange hush that settles over the mission grounds in the late afternoon. Not just the quiet of isolation, but a pressure, like air holding breath. In the old dormitories, people have reported hearing soft murmurs, not in English or German, but in whispered Arrernte, rising and falling like prayer. Others describe the faint sound of footsteps in empty rooms, or the creak of beds that no longer stand. One former caretaker tells the story of a shadowy figure often seen in the corridor outside the women's quarters. Tall, cloaked, with a soft shuffle. When he tried to investigate the movement one evening, he felt an overwhelming sadness, so intense that it brought him to tears. Nothing appeared on the security cameras. Nothing was taken. Yet the next morning, he found the old Bible in the chapel open to the book of Exodus, a passage about exile and return. More unsettling are the accounts from visitors staying overnight in the artist accommodation near the old schoolhouse. One woman, a painter from Adelaide, reported waking in the middle of the night to see a group of children standing at the foot of her bed. She said they weren't threatening, just watching. One boy stepped forward and placed a hand on her blanket, and she heard a single word: home. When she turned on the light, the room was empty. Her canvas, left blank the night before, had a faint outline drawn in red chalk, a gum tree and a cross.
Even those passing through speak of being drawn to the church. Built in 1896 from hand-hewn stone, the building remains remarkably intact, but inside, visitors describe the air as heavy, not stale, but dense with feeling. More than one person has heard music playing when no service is on, simple hymnals, a distant harmonium, and once the sound of clapping sticks in time with the tune. The Warrumungu and Arrernte elders who still live near Ontario say the land remembers, that the ancestors walk slowly here, not out of fear, but out of caution. Some spirits, they believe, are caught between beliefs, not fully Christian, not fully returned to country, lost in limbo, searching.
One elder, a woman whose grandparents lived at the mission, described a recurring dream. In it, she walks through the old kitchen, following the smell of damper and tea. She hears a woman humming a lullaby, one she never learned, but somehow knows. The dream always ends the same way. She turns a corner, sees a face she recognizes but cannot name, and wakes with tears on her cheeks.
Archaeologists working on site in the late 1990s uncovered several unmarked graves beneath what is now the community orchard. The identities of those buried there remain unknown. The graves were covered respectfully and the area blessed. But since then, some staff report that garden tools go missing and later reappear perfectly cleaned, lined up in order. One even found a posy of wildflowers left on the workbench, arranged just so. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Hermannsburg holds a kind of stillness that is hard to explain, a sadness that isn't bitter, but watchful, and a sense that the past walks very close behind the present, especially when the shadows stretch long across the mission yard.
So if you visit, speak softly. Take time to listen. Sit beneath the ghost gums and let the wind pass through your thoughts. You may hear nothing, or you may hear voices carried on the dry breath of history, voices that never got to say goodbye.
The Devil's Marbles and the Dreamtime Watchers. Scattered across the Ochre Plains north of Tennant Creek, the Devil's Marbles, known to the Warrumungu and Kaiteti peoples as Karlu Karlu, rise from the earth like the eggs of sleeping giants. Huge, rounded boulders, some balancing impossibly atop one another, they seem to defy both gravity and time. Visitors marvel at their shape, their silence, and their eerie beauty. But few realize they are being watched. For these stones are not merely geological oddities, they are sacred, and some say they are alive. The name Karlu Karlu means round boulders in the language of the traditional owners, and these formations have been central to Aboriginal dreaming stories for thousands of years. One such story tells of Arrange, the ancestral being who created the boulders as he traveled through the land. He made a hair belt, a traditional adornment for initiated men, and as he twisted the hair, pieces fell to the ground, becoming the marbles. Arrange still watches over the site, and his presence is felt in the stones, in the wind, and in the silence between. But there are other stories, older, quieter, of watchers, beings born of the Dreamtime who were given the task of guarding this sacred site. They dwell in the stones, not visible to the naked eye, but present in spirit, and those who disrespect the land risk being seen and judged. In recent decades, tourists have treated the site as a novelty, climbing the rocks for photos, carving their names into stone or pocketing small fragments as souvenirs. Some of them report strange consequences soon after: lost luggage, sudden illnesses, financial misfortunes. But others experience something more direct: dreams. Vivid, repetitive dreams of eyes watching from the rocks, of shadows moving behind them, of whispers in languages they don't understand. One backpacker, visiting from Europe in the early 2000s, took a small stone from the site and mailed it home. Within days, she began experiencing waking visions: the same red plains, the same round boulders, but under a storm-dark sky. She felt a weight on her chest every night, as though something large was pressing down. The stone was eventually returned, anonymously, with a note that read simply, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Rangers at the site collect dozens of such returned stones every year, mailed back from all over the world, often accompanied by letters of apology. The traditional owners never seek revenge, but they do remind visitors that Karlu Karlu is a men's sacred site. Climbing on the rocks, taking fragments, or behaving disrespectfully is not only offensive, but dangerous, not in the physical sense, but in a spiritual one. Even those who tread lightly have stories. One elder ranger tells of a twilight patrol in the 1990s. As the last light bled from the sky, he saw movement atop one of the tallest boulders, a tall figure standing perfectly still. Thinking it was a tourist, he called out. The figure didn't move. He climbed partway up the adjacent rock to get a better view. The figure was gone, but the rock was warm to the touch despite the cooling night, and when he climbed down, he found his boot prints, and a second set, barefoot, small, leading away into the spinifex. Another tale comes from a school group visiting from Darwin. As the children played near the base of the boulders, one girl wandered off. When the teacher found her, she was sitting cross-legged on a flat rock, speaking softly to someone invisible. When asked who she was talking to, she replied, "The old man in the red dust." She described him in detail: white hair, feather headdress, eyes like deep stone. There were no elders on the tour, no one nearby. She never saw him again. Perhaps the most haunting stories are the silent ones. The photographs taken at Karlu Karlu, where figures appear in the background, not seen at the time. Shapes that are too tall, too slender, or somehow wrong. In some images, a distortion hangs in the air, as though the rock itself were breathing. The watchers are not evil, the elders say, but they are powerful, and they are always present. They are bound to the land, awakened by disrespect, but also moved by reverence. Some visitors report feeling safe at Karlu Karlu, protected, as if something old and wise has wrapped around them like a cloak. Others feel judged, a deep discomfort that makes them leave without understanding why. One tourist wrote in the guest book, "I came for the rocks. I left with the sense that I had been seen, really seen. I don't think it wanted to harm me, but I don't think it wanted me there either." So if you visit the Devil's Marbles, walk with respect, touch nothing, climb nothing, and listen, truly listen, to the wind as it moves between the stones. You may hear nothing, or you may hear breathing, or the rustle of feathers, or a voice that speaks without sound, because the watchers are always watching, not to frighten you, but to remind you whose land this truly is.
The Red Centre's final warning. The heart of Australia is not made of concrete or steel, but of stone and silence, a silence older than words, deeper than memory. This is the Red Centre, a land where time does not pass, but pools, where shadows stretch longer than the day, where every ridge, gorge, and dry riverbed holds a story not told, but felt. And if there is one truth that echoes louder than all others, it is this: the land watches, the land remembers, and the land warns. Throughout this journey, we've wandered through haunted hospitals and vanished rail lines. We've followed ghostly stockmen, shadowed the watchers of Carlu Carlu, and listened for the cries beneath Lassiter's cave. But behind every legend, every whisper in the red wind, there is a deeper message, a caution. Not from monsters or vengeful spirits, but from the land itself. A warning shaped by millennia. This is a place where mistakes echo, where greed, arrogance, and ignorance are not simply forgotten, but absorbed. The Red Center does not forgive easily, and it never forgets. Take the tale of the tourist who climbed Uluru in defiance of local wishes, even after signage, stories, and ceremony begged him not to. He laughed at the warnings, took a stone from the summit. A souvenir, he said. Within a week, his car was struck by lightning. A freak event, but only the beginning. He lost his job, his home was broken into, his partner left. In desperation, he mailed the rock back, along with a letter of apology handwritten in shaky script. He begged the elders for forgiveness. Whether the damage was superstition or consequence is irrelevant, he felt it, and that was enough. Or consider the prospector who drilled illegally near sacred ochre pits west of the McDonnell Ranges. He ignored the elders, brushed off the stories. "It's just rock," he said. A week later, he vanished without a trace. His campsite was intact, his equipment undisturbed. Only a single line drawn in the sand remained, a circle with a line through it, a dreaming symbol of warning. No one has seen him since. Even scientists, trained in reason and logic, have found themselves humbled here. A geologist mapping seismic anomalies near Kings Canyon felt the ground shift beneath him. Not an earthquake, but a single tremor, like the earth breathing. When he checked his recordings later, the audio was corrupted, overlaid with a low rhythmic chanting. No equipment fault was found, but not all warnings are cruel. Some are gentle, a sense of being guided away from danger, of footsteps leading you back to safety. These are not punishments, but reminders that we are visitors in this land, that the spirit of the desert, whether in the form of ancestral beings, ghostly echoes, or silent watchers, is always present. Elders have long said that the Red Center is not just a place, but a teacher. It teaches patience, it teaches humility, and it teaches that the line between the living and the dead is thin, thinner than dust on the wind.
Perhaps the most powerful warning of all is that we are not separate from this land. We are part of it. And when we forget that, when we dig without asking, take without offering, or speak without listening, the land responds, not with fury, but with presence. Because here, the land is not passive, it is not silent. It speaks in ghost trains and vanishing footprints. It hums through the rocks at dusk and sings through the feathers of the broken bird. It appears in dreams, in mirrored lakes, in the sound of a matron's keys or a nurse's lullaby. This is a country that whispers truth into your bones, if you're quiet enough to hear it. So as you leave the Red Center, or as you lie in bed now with the stories still circling your thoughts, remember what these tales truly mean. They are not just spook stories. They are signposts, markers, warnings, reminders that the old spirits walk still. And if one day you return, and the wind feels colder than it should, or the shadows too long, or the silence too deep, stop. Listen. Because that silence, that's the land, waiting to see if you've remembered the rules.
You've traveled far tonight, across scorched deserts, ghost towns, sacred stones, and salt-laced echoes of memory. You've walked where the ancestors walked, where settlers vanished, and where shadows still whisper their stories to the stars. And now, as the wind softens and the silence returns, it's time to rest. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Whether you believe in spirits or not, one thing is certain: the land remembers. The Red Center is more than geography. It's a presence, and some stories cling to it like dust to boots. If this journey moved you, unsettled you, or simply helped you drift into sleep, I ask you kindly, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and I'd be honored to have you along for the next one. Now close your eyes, let the red dust settle, let the voices fade, and may your dreams be guided not by fear, but by the quiet footsteps of those who walked before you. Good night, from the heart of Australia.